Hello, everybody. Welcome to Highway the Hidden. I'm your host, Polar Bear, and on today we have a special guest, Leo. Leo, how you doing, man?
Pretty good. And yourself?
Doing great, doing great. Just out here making it. So you've had an encounter with Bigfoot up there in Canada, right?
Yeah, that's right. This is on the west side, in Nordegg, Alberta, just north of Nordegg.
Okay, okay. Would you mind going into that?
Yeah, for sure. I guess just a bit of background about myself and the location. At this point, when this was all happening, I've been planting for about 6 years. I had done other forestry work in other times of the year in some remote areas. Still forestry, still doing forestry today. But a bit about Nordegg itself is that it's surrounded by a lot of Sasquatch myths and sightings back from the native days when they had their own settlement there before there was a dam that apparently flooded the entire valley. None of this, like, I knew when I was working there. I didn't know anything about the Sasquatch history. I didn't know much about the whole history of the dam and blah, blah, blah. I was just there to make money. So on this particular day, our crew was getting flown into the block via helicopter. So nothing could be getting in there via like land transport. It'd be a very long hike just to get in from any like sensible direction for a human being. This was real close to the Wapiabi National Park, and the landscape itself was very foothilly. It was right along the Rocky Mountains north of Nordegg, Alberta. The cut block itself, if you can imagine, is a square backward 7 coming off the west side, like a puzzle piece. So the 7 was part of the land that I was supposed to be planting. It was the land that ascended up further into the foothills and along a ridgeline, somewhere where a machine could cut, and onto a plateau that cut right and disappeared behind the tree line of the site of the rest of the block. I was in the first load to be flown in before anyone else onto the cut block around 8 a.m. This area is known for its short showers of hard rain due to the close mountains. Because of this, our heli would sometimes get shut down. On this particular day, we were supposed to be going to get thunderstorms and heavy rain. So when I was dropped off my isolated cache of trees, I was told that the helicopter would most likely be shut down for about an hour or so. So at this point, no one would be getting flown in or flown out. And so the rest of my crew that was with me, they got sat down on the other end of the block, which was about like a few kilometers away, but still a measurable distance. So it's still quite isolated when I got dropped off. Yeah, as I started planting my trees up the hill, the thunderstorm itself started to really set in and started to shake the trees, and a lot of the rain that came down was hard, so it was quite noisy with all the foliage around and such. The uncut land that surrounded my narrow strip of cut block was filled with what looked to be first growth trees with thick deciduous undergrowth that was just all over the place. It was quite thick. I was basically planting right next to an old growth forest. When I got to the top of the hill where the plaza hooked right out of sight, I noticed a lightning strike, which had me wanted to howl up at the thunderstorm as I was wet and cold, and I needed some kind of adrenaline boost. So once I did that, it was immediately followed by a thunderclap. So I was almost like cut off as soon as I did it. So I started planting casually around the hook towards the end of the plateau, where I then howled again, just one more time, just to alert the wildlife that was around potentially. As at that point, there was like this sense of, like, sixth sense of something could be around, like you're on a hike and You got to make your presence known kind of thing, right? So at that point, it was about a few seconds, and I heard some kind of like a deep throated whoop. And I instantly thought that was my foreman that was just somewhere like in the tree line. But then I realized this is my first line in. This I just got here. It was like half an hour. My foreman got flown out. Was the rest of the crew in a helicopter? So I'm just thinking in my head, like it can't be anyone else. I didn't believe in Sasquatch at the time, so I was just thinking like he's gonna pop out of the bush, out of the tree line at some point. And I'm gonna see him. So for about like 15 minutes, I was just gazing over towards the tree line, like wondering where's this guy at. And at some point, I even yelled, "Hey!" because I was getting anxious. I was in this part of the block. No one was around. Something whooped at me, and nothing was coming out. And just another like point of perspective here is where I saw, or pardon me, heard this whoop come out. It was along this like steeper bank where the machine couldn't go and cut. Like I was basically along this ridge line where the machine did its best, and I was just also there trying to reforest with my best efforts. But it was just felt a bit like it's strange. I started planting my way out, and once I got to the clearing, like that's when I was totally spooked. Like once like I could let my guard down, I just like thought about why would somebody be there? It didn't make any sense because the only other people that were on the block were my foreman and two other planters, and they all got into the helicopter when they dropped me off. Sure, there was open space between us and who was dropped off, but that was kilometers. So there's no way that someone from my crew would have been able to like somehow show up to where I was, climb this steep bank where it was wooded, conceal themselves, and holler at me. And actually, at the end of the day, I asked my foreman about what was he doing in the tree line, and he looked at me like, "What are you talking about? I wasn't anywhere around there." So for a few years, I was pretty confused, and I just didn't understand what it could have been, and I didn't believe in Sasquatch at the time, and actually I fell into the group of people in forestry that just talk about Bigfoot like he's just a hoax. And like I kept thinking about that and how we all work in logged areas and valleys where you can easily reach wood with harvesting machines, where you don't typically go. And as a forestry worker, is the real rugged country where logging is just logistically not possible. And that's exactly where I've I've heard of other Sasquatch stories come out of, such as it may be with Nordegg itself, quite a bit of mountainside all along there, and the Stony National natives there that have like about 5 bands that used to inhabit the plains and also take cover in the mountains. So one of their bands, they took up some residence where the dam used to be, just south of where I heard those whoops. And their whole land got flooded, and apparently they had stories of understanding that there were a bigger tribe of natives somewhere up in the mountains. They just called them mountain people. And so once the dam flooded, there was quite a bit of like obviously commotion, and but apparently the sightings for the Sasquatch went up, because if you look at the map of where Abraham Lake is, that's all like a man-made lake. And the border now stretches, the human walking border now stretches further into the mountains. So it makes sense why there might be more sightings if the myth is true. Yeah.
So has it changed your mind on all that since you had your encounter? So do you believe more now of the Bigfoot?
I'd like to, and like I've been doing obviously a lot of my own research into it, and I I haven't been fully convinced that there is a thing, because no one has found skeletons. But then yet again, there's been stories of giant skeletons being found elsewhere in the United States. So
Right.
maybe they somehow are linked, and maybe there's just like forever gone archaeological evidence. But if this thing is still alive, then maybe it's hiding itself somehow, and maybe it's smarter than what we really think it is.
Right. I know like some of the giant skeletons that they do find, they take to the Smithsonian and is never seen again. And a lot of the animals that they find, because where I'm at in Southeast Texas, like some of those skeletons they find, like if a deer dies, it decomposes so fast, you won't see the skeleton because it's so humid and stuff, and animals, they scatter them about. But I've also heard that they bury them and they have burial grounds and stuff. They're supposed to be quite intelligent creatures from what people have researched and stuff. It's all speculation. No, there's nobody out there can say, "Hey, yeah, this is what's going on," because it's a cryptid. It's not in a zoo somewhere.
Yeah, it's not like we have a skeleton to prove it, or anyone does. But it's funny you mentioned the Smithsonian and how they've destroyed some skeleton bones, because their institute was set up about the same time that Abraham Lincoln also made the famous quote about the giants and how they wrote. And it's been written out. You can find like the original scripture of him writing out the word giants. So I don't remember the exact quote, but basically it means that he believed that there were some giants that roamed and gazed on the earth. But it's not too hard to find.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. Yeah, they were definitely giants. The government hides a lot of stuff, and I wouldn't doubt that they do hide the Sasquatch stuff, and I believe they hid it for protection for them and us, because I believe if we ran across them, people would be go out and try to kill them, and I don't think it would be good for man to try to kill one of those things, because most of the reports of people that see them, they're always 8 to 9 foot tall, when they're 1,200 pounds. I don't think a caliber that most people carry is going to stop it. But people go missing every year in these national parks and big forests and never seen again. Tents tore to shreds, and bears aren't that aggressive. But yeah, if you come across a mom with cubs and stuff, but I don't think bears are taking people out like that. I don't think bears are just knocking us off daily.
Yeah, sure. I've been face to face with bears that are just curious, and bears that want to get into a camp and just get some food. But there's a reason as to you can figure out like how people go missing from those kinds of situations. A lot of these situations where people go missing, especially in BC, in the Kootenays, all over the coast, there's been like a lot of missing people reports where they're also real close to places where there have been sightings and legends of Sasquatch reported all the way back since the natives.
Yeah, for sure. And anytime someone has a big time encounter, they always end up changing their story later on and saying, "Oh, it was a bear." And there was a story that came out. A guy refused to change his story to it was a bear, but he said of an agency came in and said, "You're going to tell these people that it was a bear. You're going to stop telling them what you saw." And he was like, "No, they need to know that there's things that's dangerous in these woods."
Who is this?
And I forgot what story it was. He told the story on what podcast was it? Was it Sasquatch Chronicles? It was one of those bigger podcasts, and he told the story. And one of the agencies, I forget which one it was. I want to think it was the FBI. One of them came in and told him. So basically, long and the short was a Bigfoot had attacked him and his buddy, and they fought it off. And they went to the hospital, and he's, "Hey, we got attacked. We know this creature came in and attacked us. This is where it's at." And I don't remember word for word, but basically When they got to the hospital, these men showed up and said, "Hey, a bear had attacked you." And he said, "No, it wasn't a bear. I know what a bear is. This wasn't a bear."
So was it
And
like throwing stones at them, or
it tried to get in the boat with them. Like it walked out into the creek and it was trying to like kill them. I guess it came into its territory, and apparently, I guess they get very territorial during mating season. I don't know why it did what it did. Maybe it was just rogue. And but for the most part, from what I've gathered on people's stories, they're mostly peaceful. But I know there's several different types. You got the Gugway, which are more baboon looking, and they're man eaters. I think Gugway actually translates to face eater. So
oh,
maybe it was one of those types. And then you got the Patty type, Patterson Gimlin. They're peaceful. They just northwest, Pacific Northwest. They just walk off. They don't want nothing to do with you. And then you got there's different types. And yeah. And so they told him, and he fought it to the end, and they froze his bank account. They made him look crazy, and yeah, a bunch of stuff. And I want to say, I think he went back, and he had ended up going back to where he was at.
oh, geez.
And yeah, and the military was there, and they were like, "Hey, we're doing a training exercise." And he was like, "Why are you randomly doing a training exercise here?" Yeah, it was the whole story is very interesting, and I can't remember where I heard it, but it was like, huh. But yeah, and it always makes you wonder. Yeah, I think they should tell people about it, but there's a lot of things they should tell people about, but I don't think they ever will, just because.
Yeah, there's actually a law here in BC for Sasquatch. It basically prohibits any shooting or killing of Sasquatch in the
Mm.
province of British Columbia. This is
And
on a government website.
yeah, and it's like, why would they have the law if they don't exist? You know what I mean? And I think relatively most of them are peaceful. I just think there are certain species that are very violent, and they will. But I think there's
Yeah.
more than just Bigfoot out there. I think there's a lot of other cryptids out there that, like, I recently discovered, not recently, a couple of years ago. I don't know if you're ever Dogman.
Dogman. No, I've never heard of Dogman.
Yeah, it's a very violent werewolf-esque creature. And I had a D.A. Roberts on. Do you know who that is?
Nope.
He's an author. You go check him out. He's very knowledgeable. And I had him on, and he was explaining Dogman and what Dogman is and all that. But basically, Dogman's been around forever, about the same amount of time as Bigfoot. And but a Dogman has like a German Shepherd type head, 8 to 9 foot tall, but they're once they lock onto you, they don't stop. Like they'll hunt you for life. And there's stories that came out of people that have shot at them, and these things have tracked the people that shot at them 10 miles to their house and waited for them, and just very evil creatures. And I think as we grow as a civilization and we're starting to expand, take over more wooded areas, I think we're pushing into darker areas and pushing these cryptids out.
Yeah.
I think.
So that's exactly what it is, especially with the old growth forests of the West Coast, especially of the U.S., with all the Doug fir and the Western red cedar that's been like logged. Obviously, all those giants are gone.
Yeah.
But I'd imagine that kind of habitat would allow for different kinds of species to be able to live on in their own way.
Yeah.
Like with all this logging and elimination of this habitat, I'm sure it'd been a lot harder. Which I guess, like going back on your thing, how you said some of them are violent, like maybe that's what it is with all this logging and deforestation and such.
Yeah, some of them, yeah, you could look up the Gugway. I think it's Gugwe. Yeah, if you get some time, look up that subspecies, and look up just look up the encounters at them. None of them are friendly. None of them are good. The encounters are usually people running, trying to get out of the area. Because once I read about them, I was like, oh man, let me type that up and see. And yeah, and it was just encounter after encounter of people just hauling ass trying to get away from them. Most encounters are people like, oh, that's a Bigfoot. Oh, okay, cool. Let me back out of the area. Let me go on about my day. An encounter like yours where they hear the scream and all right, let me get out of here. No, it's usually, oh, let me go because this thing's trying to eat me. It's very, and these are completely different. And I was also heard of people that are like the Bigfoot researchers are very against the wood knocks now because that's apparently it's enticing to them, like you're challenging them. Apparently that's a
Really?
territory thing. Yeah, I didn't know that, but yeah, I guess half, not more than half, say yeah, it's a challenge. It's not a good thing to try to call them that way.
Yeah, interesting. I guess like they would, if they wanted to communicate, they would just use
Yeah,
their own mouth, like, instead of just knocking. But that just, I've been thinking for a long time, like, why would, if this thing was a Sasquatch that did holler at me, like, why would it do that and keep itself hidden? It just, it puzzled me because, like, I, I don't know if I was just getting anxious or scared of potentially getting run over by an animal, but I couldn't hear anything because of the thunderstorm, and it almost felt like I was in the perfect place for a kill. If I was a hunter, like I would, if I was an animal and like I went into this place, like this would be the perfect spot for the rest of my pack to not understand like that I went down for a while. It's what I've been thinking for a long time, but maybe it was just trying to lure me in, seeing that it was a good opportunity. I don't know, but one way or the other, it didn't try to communicate at all past what I did.
but also there could have been one 10 feet from you, and it could have been the other one communicating down. One could have walked up right behind you, and
Yeah, I
that's
know.
what it was. And it's a
It
distraction.
could be, yeah, yeah. I've heard of that's kind of how they could hunt. This is what I've heard actually from the native people, their stories, and from the Stonies and in Alberta, and they say how they think that they hunt by in like packs and like twos and pairs, so you can scare an animal and get it to funnel down a specific spot, and then one of them will already be there in the grass and just pop up.
Yeah, pop up and take you.
So there was actually a story of two hunters that were located just northwest of where I heard those two howls. They were in the Blackstone Gap, just in those mountains, basically where it funnels in, and it's a really steep, deep gorge where they were waiting to pounce on some deer, probably with their bows. But so they were overcome with these rocks being thrown at them and these giant trees that were being shaken, and they were just, this was around like, this was in the evening too when nightfall was coming in, so they just booked it out of there.
Yeah.
But it's crazy that a lot of these people like almost look like they're being given a second chance because it shows that they've got some brains to make those kinds of decisions.
Yeah, and I think they do too. They hunt. I think they do hunt in packs. One will do the distraction, and the other one will walk up because they can move. Being so big, it's so weird how they can move so feather, and you don't even know it. And like your situation, like one's calling, and all of a sudden, boom, one's right behind you, and then that's it. Have you ever heard the what is it, the Ape Rock Canyon? I think that's is it Rock Ape Rock Canyon?
Ape Rock Canyon, huh?
Yeah, or the Ape Canyon? Maybe it's Ape Canyon. When we get off here, look up that story. That one's pretty interesting. Is four or five miners. They go to war with a band of Sasquatches. I want to say like that. I think it's Ape Canyon. Yeah, it might be up there in your near your area. They go to war with them, and
Yeah, it's in Washington.
it yeah, it ends up being all night, like an all night fight, and it's pretty interesting.
Hmm.
And that's a good one. I
It kind of makes sense, like, because where all these like stories are coming from, because a lot of them were in the U.S. with all these like kind of wars and natives fighting against these Bigfoots and Sasquatch and wildmen, whatever they wanted to call them at the time. This was all happening like for hundreds of years before, and I'm just
oh
thinking
yeah.
like, that's a that's around the same time that the ice caps melted, and
Mm-hmm.
and that like a lot of space was freed up further up north. So it makes you think that maybe whatever tribe they were fighting against probably just shifted further north. I mean, I think
Yeah.
I'm thinking a bit too far back now because I'm talking about the Younger Dryas era. like 14,000, 11,000 years ago.
But
I believe that perhaps there was like a race of giants back then that the natives were fighting against. And then at some point, when those ice caps melted, they saw that space was free and they moved up there because it was so rugged that nobody else wanted to inhabit it.
mhm. And then maybe that's where they encountered them, and they had been there the whole time, and they just evolved too, like we did. And I think that's the big thing with Sasquatches. I think they're evolving too, and as we push, they push too. And I don't know. I think we're going to start seeing more and more encounters, but I think more and more people are open to the idea of them being real now.
Yeah, I think people are a lot
Whoa.
more open to a lot of more things
But
as
I don't,
opposed to when those first few footages of the Bigfoot came out. I forget who it was, but the film where the guy's just walking away and people keep
yeah.
saying it was just a monkey costume, but maybe it's not.
Yeah, the Patterson Gimlin film. Yeah,
Yeah.
the famous. But I don't believe they're peace loving hippies. I don't think people should go out and look for them and try to make friends with them.
No, me neither. If you were a wild man that was just only had your own body to depend on, I'm sure you'd be grasping at every opportunity you had to get some
Yeah,
food and
exactly. And somebody's just gonna walk up. But yeah, I'm pretty sure you're gonna eat them. But I guess it goes any kind of way because there was a story. There's so many different encounters and stories, and I read so many all the time. There was the one of the little kid crying in the woods, and she had went missing, and they found her the next day, and she said a big hairy man had protected her all night from the rainstorm, and then brought her back the next morning. And it's like, what big giant hairy man would protect a kid all night from the rainstorm? And it's so you get both stories, so you get both kinds, and it's. I think it just depends on their mood that day, really, on what they're gonna do. Like they're temperamental, just like humans, I think.
yeah, yeah, bigger man swings. But
Yeah.
I've also heard of they could perhaps have an EMF, like an electromagnetic field, just like
Mm.
us humans. Some people say that the EMF could be like a pathway to psychological powers, like even brain to brain communication kind of stuff.
Right.
So if this thing, Bigfoot thing, maybe it has its own, maybe it knows how to use it, even though it's like a
Right.
prehistoric looking cave ape thing.
Yeah.
Who knows?
Exactly. Have you heard the Sierra Sounds by Ron Moorhead?
No.
Check those out too. And he actually caught Dr. Ron Moorhead. He caught they're talking in the Sierra mountain range up in Nevada, and they're talking. I think it's in Nevada, but they're talking, and it's pretty cool. It sounds like it's a weird gibberish, but it's 15-20 minute long video on YouTube, but it's old. It's from the 70s, but it's pretty interesting. Yeah. Just check that out too. And yeah, man, I think there's a lot of evidence out there proving that, but I think it's because a lot more people research Bigfoot than any other cryptid. And that's just my opinion, you know. I research every cryptid out there that I can find. That's what I like to do. But
Yeah, I think there's pretty good evidence for, not evidence, but if there was evidence, pretty good evidence we all actually believe in it. But I feel there's good positions pointing towards like that it could actually be a reality. My kind of theory is that I don't know if you've heard of the Nephilim or the Watchers or so I don't know. I guess the story goes in the Bible that the Watchers, they created their own demigods when they took the human women, and then God was angry at some point later on, so he overthrew them and washed them away with his flood, and of course they were all giants. But the more and more breeding that was had with the Watchers, the more kind of degraded their size most likely probably went. But I feel like maybe if the story of the Nephilim is true, then it could very easily connect to Sasquatch. Maybe Sasquatch is just the leftover of the Nephilim, the creation.
yeah, I mean, that definitely could be it. And that's the thing, man. We don't know what they could. I've also heard them being like interdimensional beings, like you only see them when they want you to see them too. And
Yeah, I've heard that recently as well, but it just why would they want to show you themselves? Because there's been so many different instances where it's like they scared someone, or sometimes they just look at somebody and I I don't know, like it seems mysterious to me that they would want to just suddenly hide. What, but you never know. Like maybe they're like visiting Earth and they're just aliens. Maybe
yeah,
maybe they're just hiding in the woods and that's their home. They don't need to.
yeah,
They don't need to rent an apartment or something. Just go hide in the woods.
yeah. I guess, but now all the woods are gone, so now they gotta find new means. I don't know. Maybe they're gonna be walking down the road soon. Who knows? It's just crazy, and there's so many people they dedicate their lives to it. They spend their whole lives in the woods looking for them to get that one encounter again, and then never happens. And some people they just happen by chance to get it, just that one, and they see it one time, and that's all it takes.
Yeah, I don't know. I've heard many stories where people just get captured and they become pets of the Sasquatch, or a lot of natives. A lot of their women would get jacked and they'd be forced to pick berries for them. A lot of kind of stories like that where some native woman got captured and became pregnant and had to escape. But I think the most credible stories I've ever heard are probably the native stories. They just seem a lot more credible in their nature, and due to the fact there's also many other native tribes that are so far off that have different names and different experiences for very much the same sort of phenomena.
And that, yeah, for sure. Yeah, there's just so many, like you said, there's so much out there with them, and you could go either way with it. All right, brother. I appreciate you coming on. I really do.
Yeah, happy to be here. But I'm happy to share my experience so other people are more aware of the wild so they don't run into things they don't want to.
Yeah, definitely be careful out there. Yeah. All right, brother. Thank you.
Bye.
That's it for tonight, everyone. If you'd like to be on the show, remember, shoot me an email. My email address is polarbearhoth@gmail.com. Also, you can reach out to me on the socials, TikTok and Instagram, polarbearhoth, or follow the new Facebook page, Highway of the Hidden.